Doug Clark is a notorious American serial killer. Clark had an accomplice to the 7 murders he committed. Her name was Carol M. Bundy, and they were known as the Sunset Strip Murderers. Together they practiced pedophilia and necrophilia. They worked well together because they had the same dark sexual fantasies. While Doug and Carol lived together, he would bring prostitutes home for both of them to share. He was then interested in an 11-year-old girl who was a neighbor of theirs. Carol tricked the girl into sexual games and posing for sexual photographs. Doug began to talk about his fantasy of wanting to kill a girl during sex. Carol brought him 2 automatic pistols. This is how the murders of necrophilia started. He wanted to fulfill his fantasy of killing a girl during sex and feeling her vaginal contractions during the death spasms. The killings began in June of 1980. Clark told Bundy one night about 2 teenage girls he had picked up on the Sunset Strip that day and murdered. They were Gina Nerano and Cynthia Chandler. He demanded that they perform oral sex on him, and then he proceeded to shoot them both in the head. He then took them to a garage and raped their dead bodies. He dumped their bodies near the Ventura Freeway, and then they were found the following day. Clark continued his killing spree 12 days later. This time he chose Karen Jones and Exie Wilson. He lured them into his car, shot them, and then dumped their bodies. This time he took a trophy, Exie's head. He put her head in his fridge and would perform oral sex on it. 2 days later, they cleaned the head and stuck it in a box and left it in an alley. 3 days after this occurrence, the body of a runaway named Marnette Comer was found in the San Fernando Valley. After the autopsy, they said she had been killed 3 weeks prior to being found. This would make her Clark's first victim. Carol M. Bundy has become obsessed with a man named Jack Murray. One night after a show in 1980, she lured him into her car to have sex. She then shot and decapitated him. Doug Clark is also said to have murdered another young girl who could not be identified because her body was decomposed. Clark was immediately arrested when evidence led to him. While at trial, he acted innocent and tried to pin everything on Carol. The jury believed he was guilty and was sentenced to the death penalty in 1983. Bundy took the plea bargain and only gained a life sentence in prison. Doug Clark was born with the name Daniel Clark. He was born March 10, 1948 in Pennsylvania, where his father Franklin was stationed for the Navy. He was the 3rd son of 5 children who included Frank Jr., Carol Ann, Doug, John Ronlin, and Walt. While in 3rd grade, he decided that he wanted to be called Doug. Throughout his childhood, his family moved several times. In 1958, Franklin retired from the Navy as a lieutenant commander. He then moved to an area called Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands with his family, where he gained a civilian position as an engineer with the Transport Company of Texas. Doug Clark's mother, Blanche, worked as a radio controller. They lived in Kwajalein for 2 years. Then they returned to the United States and moved to Berkeley for a short period of time before moving to India. In India, they lived in a home that wealthy people would live in and also had several servants. Other Americans that lived in the area described the Clarks as pleasant people who kept to themselves. Nobody could remember Doug having any behavior problems. Doug and Walt were later sent to Eclat, which is the international school in Geneva. International celebrities, children of UN diplomats, and European and Middle Eastern royalty attended this school. Walt and Doug were completely opposite of each other. Walt was popular and outgoing, while Doug was arrogant and morose. While at this school, Doug did not do so well. He couldn't be bothered by doing homework and studying. He claimed that he had developed his preference for kinky sex while living in Geneva. He bragged to his classmates of his unusual sexually exploits with the girls in their town. His parents had been called by the school for his bad behavior. On several different occasions, he had been drunk, stole a bicycle, and wrote a sexually explicit letter to one of his female teachers. Inevitably, he was kicked out of school. Despite his bad behavior, his parents refused to believe that their child had any signs of behavioral problems. Doug then went to Culver Military Academy in Indiana. During this time, his parents continued to move around the world. Doug was a very intelligent kid, but put little effort into his schoolwork and passed. He was involved in several sports and played the saxophone. While in the academy, he had no close friends. The kids he hung out with had a don't-give-a-damn attitude. Not having friends didn't really bother him. Because of his behavioral problems, he saw the school's therapist often. Regardless of his love for Bobby, he would take photos of them having sex and pass them around school. He enjoyed the attention he got from this. In 1967, he graduated from Culver at the age of 19. He then moved back in with his parents, who were now retired and living in Yosemite. To avoid being in the front line in the Vietnam War, he enlisted in the Air Force in radio intelligence. He was stationed in Texas and then Anchorage, Alaska, where he had the job of decoding Russian messages. The military discipline he underwent reminded him of Culver, and he resented his senior officers. At the age of 24, he met his wife to be 27-year-old Beverly. They met in a bar in North Hollywood. Together they owned a car upholstery business. He believed he was the intelligent one in their relationship and would not take any advice she had for their business. In the 70s, business wasn't as good as it used to be, so they sold it. To pay off their debts, Doug worked in a gas station and as a security guard prior to him buying and selling items at auctions to resell at swap meets. Doug also believed he was the better salesman in the relationship. Due to his belief, Beverly's job was just to load and unload. His one sister, Carol Ann, stated Doug drank heavily and would become over-anxious and angry when drunk. Beverly tried to get him to join Alcoholics Anonymous to save their marriage. He then stopped drinking for 2 years. Beverly recommended that Doug work for the city as a steam plant trainee. In 1976, after 4 years of marriage, Beverly and Doug got divorced. In 1979, he began working at the Jergens factory where he was a stationary engineer and his job was to tend to the large boiler. He enjoyed the sense of power he got working at the factory. In February of 1980, he set his car on fire outside of the Jergens factory to get his insurance. He later told his sister Carol that he had done it to get rid of evidence. He preferred fat, unattractive women who would willingly give him free rent, food, and money in return for the attention he gave towards them.